Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about Cleopatra. Okay, so reason why we're talking about Cleopatra is because apparently Netflix did some type of a show where they depicted her as black. Okay, the issue here is not that they're depicting her as black, it is that they are rewriting history, which is something that leftist socialists have been trying to do for a very long time. Now, in years past, probably going back about 15 years, I did spend a good deal of time studying Egyptian history, and I probably have forgotten a lot more than I actually remember. But there's a couple of things that did stand out, and I can just kind of recall off of the top of my head. So, the first thing I want to bring out is that the 25th dynasty of during the Egyptian I guess empire. The 25th dynasty was in fact black. Okay, they were basically Nubians, which was basically they were from modern day Sudan. Okay, so it was the area that the Egyptians referred to as Nubia, and there was a kingdom over there called Kush, which at some point, I think it was something like somewhere around 700 or so BC, they invaded and dominated the Egyptians, and they established a Nubian dynasty. Okay, and they were 100% black, no question about it. Egyptians were pretty good about documenting their history, particularly the history of their pharaohs. Okay, we probably know a lot more about the history of Egypt than we know of, let's say, the Mid Ages, right? The European Middle Ages. So we do know a good deal about Egyptian history. 25th dynasty, no question about it. They were black. In fact, when the Egyptians do their hieroglyphs, they usually paint women white, men red, because that reflects them being outdoors, either in the fields or doing military service. So they're basically absorbing the sun. So the reddish color reflects the tan that Egyptian men had. And then they represented people, let's say, from Nubia as black. So they were very, very clear about that. And again, that is reflected in the 25th dynasty. So here's the thing, there's no reason to look at Cleopatra and say that she was black, because for one thing, the Ptolemaic dynasty was not very successful. Okay, so let's talk about Cleopatra's dynasty. She was a descendant of one of Alexander the Great's generals. Okay, so what happened was Alexander the Great, first he conquered most of Greece, then he went towards Persia, conquered Persia. Then he went down towards Egypt, conquered Egypt. Okay, so the interesting thing about Alexander, right? And well, first of all, let's say this: when Alexander died, which was he died fairly young, around 33. So after he created his empire, he pretty much died. It was split into four. Okay, so Ptolemy, one of his generals, he got the area that was basically Egypt. The interesting thing is that with the Macedonians, right? Because the Greek Macedonians, in Macedon, okay, Alexander and his father Philip II, they were kind of considered. I mean, they were kings, but they were more like a first among equals. Okay, so they weren't king in the sense of like anointed by the gods or something. They were kings in the sense of the leading lord. Okay, so that was how the Greeks saw their kings. Okay, now the Persians, because remember now Alexander he conquered Persia. The Persians considered their kings like as anointed by the gods. Okay, basically, basically they were selected. They were basically essentially holy. They weren't gods, but they were kind of like holy-ish. Okay, that's kind of a good way to put that. Now, in Egypt, on the other hand, the pharaohs, okay, were considered gods on earth. Okay, so in Egypt, you were basically a god if you were a pharaoh. Okay, and that applied to all the pharaohs. Okay, in all dynasty, the pharaohs were gods. So to the Greeks, okay, it was a lot more preferable to be a pharaoh, right, than it was to be a Persian king or a Greek Macedonian king, right? So it's always better to be a god than it is to be a king. Okay, so the Macedonians, they really liked this idea of being pharaoh. So what Alexander did is he set up this city in Egypt called Alexandria. Okay, and Alexandria was set up to be a Greek city. It was a city built by Greeks, and it was intended for Greeks to live in there. And the Egyptians were only allowed to come in basically to work. Okay, so the Egyptians, if they were going to be in the city, they had to be there for a specific purpose. Okay, so that's the nature of Alexandria, where Cleopatra was. Now, the reason why I was telling you about this whole thing about how the Greeks preferred to be pharaohs rather than kings is really important, because here's the thing with pharaohs, right? A pharaoh is a god on earth. So what that means is, if you're a god, well, a god can only marry another god. Okay, so what that meant is, if you're a pharaoh who's a god and you need another god to get married, who you gonna get married to, right? Well, you pretty much have to get married to somebody within your own family. So it was very typical in the Egyptian tradition for the pharaoh to marry his sister. Okay, that's how it was. So in the Ptolemaic dynasty, right? So again, Ptolemy was one of Alexander's generals. Okay, so going down the line after that, they all pretty much married within the family, right? So that, because gods only marry gods. So it's not just that Cleopatra was of pure-blooded Greek descent, right? She was also of pure-blooded Ptolemaic descent, because they did not marry outside of the family, because that was the Egyptian tradition. That's the one Egyptian tradition that they just swallowed up, right? They loved this idea of being gods. Okay, so that's how we know. That's how we know what Cleopatra's bloodline is. Now, I think some people have called into question what her mother or grandmother might have been. Again, they going with that mindset, it would have been somebody from within the family, because they wanted to maintain that god status. Okay, it would not have been. Forget about it being somebody outside, somebody being Egyptian or somebody being non-Greek. It wouldn't even have been somebody that was non-Ptolemy. Okay, it had to be a Ptolemy. Okay. So now that I have established why her bloodline had to be not just 100% Greek, but also 100% Ptolemy, let's take a step ahead. And again, why are they trying to make Cleopatra a pure black? Again, this is all part of their relabeling history. Okay, it would be kind of like trying to say that Martin Luther King was white or something. It just doesn't make sense. It's just silly on its face. Now it may not be so silly to somebody in Europe or maybe in China, right? If you tell them that, hey, Martin Luther King was a white guy, right? To somebody that's Chinese, that they might not say okay, so he was white, so maybe he's a white guy. To them that wouldn't be a big deal, right? But obviously here in the United States, that would be a big deal. Okay, so to people that are Egyptian and who are Greek, if you try to make Cleopatra something other than what she actually was, they don't like that very much. Okay, now I want to go a step further here and say that they're trying to claim the wrong treasure. Okay, the Ptolemaic dynasty was nothing to be proud of. Okay, first of all, Cleopatra was the last person in that dynasty. Okay, she basically, in an effort to try and save her dynasty, she basically became Caesar's side chick. Okay, and then when Caesar was killed, she then became Mark Antony's side chick. Okay, so and beyond that, the Romans, basically, especially when she became Mark Antony's side chick, they pretty much did not like her. They didn't even like her when she was Caesar's side chick. So the Romans in that time period referred to her as a whore. Okay, they had lots of really nasty things to say about Cleopatra. So again, this is not a dynasty that I think anybody would want to claim. All right, because number one, it was a failed dynasty that ended, basically ended Egyptian sovereignty. Okay, and the way she tried to maintain that sovereignty was by basically whoring herself out, first to Caesar and then to Mark Antony. Okay, now as far as her looks, she was probably a decent looking woman. I think from what I have read from the Roman history side, I think the thing that mostly captivated Caesar was the fact that she was the ruler of this Egyptian city, and Egyptian cities to the Romans at that time were fantastic. They were marvelous because in Caesar's time, okay, the Colosseum had not been built yet. Okay, at that time, in Caesar's time, Rome was basically mud huts. Okay, it was not the Rome that the Rome that we normally think of with the Colosseum and the temples and all that stuff. That's like 100, 200 years later, right? In Caesar's time, Rome was like all mud huts, very basic housing. It wasn't glamorous. So when Caesar went to Alexandria, he was amazed with what he saw in Alexandria. Okay, so I think that, and also Cleopatra was educated. Okay, she was, I think, from what I read, she was the first Ptolemy that could not only, obviously she could speak Greek, because she was Greek, but she could also speak Egyptian. So she was the first Ptolemy that could speak Egyptian. And I'm gonna bet that she probably also spoke Roman. Okay, in fact, I heard she could speak a few languages. I knew she could speak Greek. I know she was the first to speak Egyptian. I'm gonna bet that she knew how to speak Roman. So she was probably very intelligent, and I think that is really what. Plus, again, the grandeur of the city, the fact that she was the queen of this city, was what I think captured Caesar's attention and imagination. I mean, I'm sure she was pretty because she was young, and pretty much all young girls are pretty, right? Most of the time. So that's the deal with Cleopatra. So again, if you're looking for somebody to claim and relate to, it's probably, especially if you're from a black heritage, Cleopatra's probably not it, okay? Because she was Caesar's whore, and then she was Mark Antony's whore, okay? If you're looking for something in the Egyptian history that you want to take some pride in, go to the 25th dynasty, okay? Because that dynasty accomplished a lot. They erected wonderful things. They were very successful in warfare. That's where you want to go look, all right? Because again, now we're sticking to actual history. We're not rewriting history. Okay, so I wanted to throw that out there. And this is, I just wanted to give you guys an idea why, a lot of people are really upset with Netflix trying to recolor Cleopatra, and maybe, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it would not have been such a big deal, right? They would have said, okay, they made a mistake, they don't know what they're doing, but at this point, we know that they're doing it intentionally for, I guess, brainwashing purposes, for political purposes. So that's basically they're just trying to stupefy the population. But yeah, so that's why a lot of people take offense to it, including myself, because they're basically rewriting it. They're just trying to rewrite history, which is a pattern that we're seeing with the leftist socialist type of people. So hope you guys enjoyed this information, and I will talk to y'all soon.